The evening in the restaurant was like any other. The quiet hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft background music all blended together to create an atmosphere of calm and elegance. In the midst of it all, Olivia moved gracefully from table to table, carrying plates and drinks with ease. She was one of the newer staff members, still learning the ropes, but she was good at her job. She kept her head down, focused, and avoided drawing attention to herself. She was content with this. She didn't need to stand out. The restaurant was known for attracting a wealthy crowd, businessmen, socialites, and those with a taste for the finer things in life. The guests came and went, often without giving Olivia a second glance. She didn't mind. It was a routine, and as long as she did her job well, that was all that mattered. She didn't expect anything more from the job. That evening, as she walked into the dining room, she noticed a man sitting alone at one of the corner tables. He was older, well-dressed in a dark suit, and had an air of confidence about him that made him stand out from the other patrons. His presence was calm yet commanding, and he seemed to observe everything around him with a certain intensity. He wasn't loud, nor did he try to draw attention to himself, but there was something undeniably powerful about the way he carried himself. Olivia had seen him around before. He was a regular customer, and from what she had overheard, he was a successful businessman with a reputation for being sharp, driven, and private. People talked about him in hushed tones, admiring his success and his ability to make deals others couldn't. Olivia had never interacted with him much, other than to serve him his meals and drinks, but she'd always noticed how people around him seemed to treat him with respect. That night, as she approached his table to deliver his drink, he looked up at her. His eyes, though kind, had a sharpness to them, as if he was always analyzing everything he saw. "Do you play the piano?" he asked, his voice soft but deliberate. Olivia froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. "Excuse me?" she replied, unsure if she had heard him right. "The piano?" he repeated, nodding toward the grand piano in the corner of the room. "Do you play?" Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected such a question. It wasn't that she didn't know how to play. It was just that she had never shared that part of herself with anyone. Playing the piano was something she had done for as long as she could remember, but it was always a private thing, something just for her. She had never once played in front of others, let alone in a public setting like this. No, she stammered, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I don't play." The man didn't seem surprised by her response. He simply gave her a thoughtful smile and nodded. "Shame," he said almost to himself. "I've heard you're quite talented. It would be nice to hear you play." Olivia felt her heart race. How could he have known? She hadn't mentioned it to anyone, she never had. It had been years since she'd even considered playing in front of someone else. The thought of being in the spotlight made her anxious. She quickly collected herself, trying to brush off the sudden unease she felt. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken," she replied. Though she couldn't hide the slight quiver in her voice, the man gave a small nod, as if accepting her words without question. "Well, perhaps another time," he said before turning his attention to the wine list the waiter had just presented. Olivia took a step back, still processing what had just happened. She felt strange, like something inside her had shifted. The way he had asked, the way he had looked at her made her feel seen in a way that she hadn't experienced in a long time. But it wasn't just his gaze. It was the fact that he had spoken to her about something so personal, so hidden that no one else had ever even acknowledged. She returned to her duties, but her mind kept drifting back to the conversation. Why had he asked her? Was it just a casual question, or did he see something in her that she hadn't noticed before? As the evening wore on, Olivia's thoughts continued to wander. She served the remaining tables, but her focus was off. Her hands felt unsteady as she carried plates to the guests, and her thoughts kept returning to the piano in the corner of the room. It was a beautiful instrument, polished and gleaming, just waiting for someone to play it. For as long as she had worked at the restaurant, she had avoided even looking at it too closely. It was too intimidating, too exposed. But now, for some reason, it seemed to call to her. After a while, the restaurant began to quiet down. Most of the guests had finished their meals and were preparing to leave. The man in the corner booth had already paid his bill and was making his way toward the door. As he passed by Olivia, he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. She felt a wave of warmth rush over her, but she quickly pushed it aside. It wasn't anything, Just a simple gesture. He probably hadn't thought much of it, but still, his words lingered in her mind. "I've heard you're quite talented." As the last of the guests filtered out of the restaurant, Olivia found herself standing by the piano. The room was empty now, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the air conditioning. She glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to walk in and interrupt her, but there was no one. The restaurant was quiet, peaceful even. Without really thinking about it, she walked over to the piano and sat down. She had always been drawn to it, even when she'd first started working here. It was like the instrument itself was a part of the restaurant's charm, adding an air of sophistication that she had always admired from a distance. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She hadn't played in months, not since she had started working here. She had convinced herself that she didn't have time for such things anymore, that there was no room for music in her busy life. But as her fingers pressed down on the keys, the familiar sound filled the air, and she felt a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. The music flowed from her fingers effortlessly, the notes filling the room with warmth. For a brief moment, Olivia forgot where she was, lost in the music. It was just her and the piano, the sound of the keys the only thing that mattered. When she finished, she sat back and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The room was still silent, the music now nothing more than a fading echo. She stared at the piano for a long moment, her mind racing. What had just happened? Had she really just played in front of an audience, even if it was just the empty room? For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt before. Hope. A sense of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than she had ever let herself believe. And then, she thought about the man who had asked her to play. What if he had seen something in her that she had been too afraid to see in herself? What if, just maybe, there was a future for her beyond serving drinks and clearing tables? As the restaurant grew quiet around her, Olivia felt a shift inside herself. Something had changed. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The next few days passed by quietly for Olivia. The memory of the millionaire's comment lingered in her mind, but she did her best to push it aside. She had a job to do, and that was all that mattered. She had enough on her plate as it was, juggling the demands of her work with the uncertainty of her future. She wasn't someone who liked to take risks. She preferred the comfort of familiarity, the safety of routine. But that was before the piano, before the strange, unexpected encouragement of someone who barely knew her. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. "I've heard you're quite talented." The words haunted her, filling her thoughts whenever she was alone. She had always believed that her music was just something personal, a way to escape the world. But what if there was more to it? What if she could be something more than just a waitress? What if she had the potential to pursue her passion and actually make something of it? But then again, what did she know about taking risks? About stepping into the unknown? She had lived her whole life in the background, never daring to be anything more than ordinary. She had never imagined that someone like him would take notice of her, let alone offer words of encouragement. It made her uncomfortable, like she was stepping into a world she wasn't meant to be part of. And yet there was a part of her that wanted to explore it, that wanted to see what it felt like to be more than just a quiet presence in the background. That evening, as Olivia prepared for her shift, she caught herself glancing toward the piano in the corner of the room. She had never really thought about it before, other than as a beautiful instrument that added to the restaurant's charm. But now it seemed to beckon to her, almost as if it were waiting for her to take a step toward it. She felt the familiar rush of nerves building inside her. What if someone saw her? What if they expected something great from her? She wasn't ready. She didn't know if she could handle it. She was too scared to fail, too afraid to expose herself. But still the idea lingered, refusing to be ignored. As the restaurant filled with guests that evening, Olivia went about her duties, trying to keep her mind off the piano. But it was impossible. Every time she passed by it, her eyes would inevitably wander toward it. She caught herself wondering what it would feel like to sit at the bench, to place her hands on the keys, to let the music fill the air. But she quickly dismissed the thought. It was just a fantasy, a fleeting desire. That was until she noticed him again. The millionaire was back. He was seated at his usual corner table, his back straight and his eyes scanning the room. Olivia felt a flutter of nerves. What was it about him that made her feel this way? Why did she care what he thought? It didn't make any sense. As she approached his table, he looked up at her and smiled. "I see you're working hard tonight," he said, his voice calm and friendly. There was a warmth to his tone, as though he had genuinely taken an interest in her. Olivia smiled back, a little unsure of how to respond. "Just doing my job," she said, trying to keep it light. He nodded, his eyes flicking toward the piano in the corner of the room. "Have you had a chance to play yet?" he asked. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. He remembered. The conversation from a few days ago rushed back into her mind. She suddenly felt self-conscious, her palms growing sweaty. She tried to hide her unease behind a polite smile. No, she said quietly. "I haven't had the chance yet." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze soft but direct. "You should. I'm sure it would be a wonderful thing to hear." Her heart raced, but she didn't know how to respond. She wanted to say something, to explain that it wasn't that simple, that playing the piano was something she kept private, but the words wouldn't come. She could only nod and quickly turn to walk away. As she moved toward the back of the restaurant, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that he had been serious. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no hidden agenda. It was just a simple suggestion. But it had felt like so much more. Why did she feel so affected by it? She tried to push the thought aside, but it lingered with her for the rest of the night. She kept thinking about the piano, about what it would be like to play in front of others. She thought about what he had said, about how he had encouraged her without even knowing her. It felt strange to be encouraged by someone she barely knew, someone who didn't owe her anything. As the night drew to a close, the restaurant quieted down, and the guests began to leave. Olivia moved to clean up the tables, her thoughts still swirling. The piano in the corner seemed to call out to her. She had never realized how badly she wanted to play, how much she had longed for the freedom that music gave her, but fear held her back. Fear of making a mistake, fear of not being good enough. As the last guest left the restaurant, Olivia found herself standing before the piano once again. The room was empty now, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the air conditioning. She glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to walk in and interrupt her. But there was no one. The restaurant was quiet, peaceful even. Without really thinking about it, she walked over to the piano and sat down. She had always been drawn to it, even when she'd first started working here. It was like the instrument itself was a part of the restaurant's charm, adding an air of sophistication that she had always admired from a distance. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She hadn't played in months, not since she had started working here. She had convinced herself that she didn't have time for such things anymore, that there was no room for music in her busy life. But as her fingers pressed down on the keys, the familiar sound filled the air, and she felt a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. The music flowed from her fingers effortlessly, the notes filling the room with warmth. For a brief moment, Olivia forgot where she was, lost in the music. It was just her and the piano, the sound of the keys the only thing that mattered. When she finished, she sat back and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The room was still silent, the music now nothing more than a fading echo. She stared at the piano for a long moment, her mind racing. What had just happened? Had she really just played in front of an audience, even if it was just the empty room? For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt before. Hope. A sense of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than she had ever let herself believe. And then, she thought about the man who had asked her to play. What if he had seen something in her that she had been too afraid to see in herself? What if, just maybe, there was a future for her beyond serving drinks and clearing tables? As the restaurant grew quiet around her, Olivia felt a shift inside herself. Something had changed. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The days that followed Olivia's impromptu performance at the piano were filled with a mix of uncertainty and quiet reflection. At first, she tried to dismiss the feelings that had emerged after playing. It had been a small, private moment, just her and the music. But it had left an impact on her in a way she couldn't quite explain. The sounds of the piano had resonated deep within her, stirring up emotions she had long kept buried. She had always told herself that music wasn't a path for someone like her. Still, she kept her distance from the piano for a few days. She focused on her work, going through the motions of her shifts without letting herself be distracted by thoughts of the past. She couldn't afford to get caught up in dreams that weren't hers. She had a job to do, and that was where her energy should be directed. The other staff members, as always, didn't ask too many questions. Olivia had always been quiet, preferring to stay in the background, and they respected that. It was easier that way, yet every now and then her eyes would wander toward the corner where the grand piano stood. The sight of it stirred something inside her, a longing she couldn't ignore. The thought of playing again crept back into her mind, but she pushed it away each time. It wasn't meant to be. Her place was here, working in the restaurant, not standing in front of an audience playing music. But on one particular evening, something felt different. The restaurant was unusually quiet, with only a few patrons seated at tables. Most of the staff had finished their shifts, leaving Olivia with a rare moment of peace. She walked through the dining area, checking on the last few guests, but her gaze kept drifting toward the piano. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it wasn't worth thinking about. But something urged her forward. She couldn't explain why, but her feet moved toward the corner where the piano sat. Her fingers itched to play. There was no one around now, just the empty room, the soft hum of the air conditioning and the sound of her own footsteps. Olivia stood in front of the piano for a long time, staring at the keys. The hesitation she had felt before was still there, but this time there was something else too. It wasn't just fear. It was a quiet sense of excitement, the kind she had rarely felt in her life. Maybe this was what she had been waiting for all along, this moment of clarity when she realized that music was more than just a past hobby. It was a part of who she was. Taking a deep breath, Olivia sat down at the piano. Her hands rested gently on the keys, and she closed her eyes for a brief moment. The silence around her seemed to amplify the sounds of her heartbeat, but she pushed those thoughts aside. She wasn't here to perform for anyone else. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was just going to play. She pressed a single key and the sound echoed in the quiet room. It felt familiar, comforting, almost like a promise. Olivia let her fingers move more freely, following the melody that had been in her head for days. The music flowed from her in a way it hadn't before, effortlessly, without hesitation. It was as if the piano had always been waiting for her to return, waiting for her to let go of the fears and doubts that had kept her away. The more she played, the more she felt herself slipping into a state of calm. It was as though the outside world had faded away, leaving only the music and the rhythm of her hands. Her fingers danced across the keys and she lost track of time, completely immersed in the experience. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about anything else. There was no restaurant, no customers, no expectations. There was only the music, and it felt like freedom. When she finally stopped, she opened her eyes, surprised to find that a good amount of time had passed. The room was still quiet, and she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a while. Her fingers hovered over the keys, reluctant to stop playing, but she knew it was time to pull away. She had done something she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. She had played without fear, without the weight of judgment on her shoulders. As Olivia stood up from the piano, she felt a quiet sense of pride. It wasn't about the performance, it wasn't even about the music itself, though that had been a part of it. It was about the act of allowing herself to be vulnerable, of taking a risk and stepping outside of the routine she had built around herself. She didn't know what would come of it, but she knew one thing. She was different now. The music had changed her, even if only a little. The next day, as Olivia arrived for her shift, she couldn't help but feel a shift inside herself. She felt a little lighter, a little more open to the possibility of change. She wasn't sure what that would look like, but for the first time, she was willing to entertain the idea of something more, something outside of the restaurant. The music had awakened something inside her, and she wasn't ready to let it go. When she walked into the dining area, she was surprised to see the millionaire sitting at his usual table again. He was alone, as he often was, and he didn't seem to notice Olivia right away. She continued with her duties, moving between tables and serving the last of the evening's meals. But her mind kept drifting back to him. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about him that had stirred something inside her, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge fully. Finally, as she moved past his table, he looked up and caught her eye. His expression softened and he gave her a small smile. "I see you're in a good mood today," he said casually. Olivia was caught off guard by the comment. "Oh, yeah," she said, trying to act casual. "Just another day." He nodded, as if sensing there was more to her words than she was letting on. "You should play again sometime," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I think you have something special." His words took her by surprise. She hadn't expected him to bring up the piano again. She wasn't sure what to say, but his simple encouragement sent a wave of warmth through her chest. "Maybe I will," she said quietly. He gave her another smile, this one more genuine, as though he understood something she didn't. "I hope you do," he said. "You deserve to share your gift with others." As Olivia walked away, her heart felt a little lighter. It wasn't much, just a simple conversation, just a few words exchanged. But they were enough to remind her that there was more to her than she had been letting herself believe. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to find out. And maybe, just maybe, the music would guide her there. Olivia's life in the restaurant had always been predictable. But ever since that quiet evening at the piano, everything felt different. She found herself looking at her life from a new perspective. The days seemed to move more slowly now, filled with possibilities that hadn't existed before. The music she had played in the quiet of the restaurant had opened something inside her, something she wasn't sure how to control. It was like a spark that had ignited something she couldn't put out. Over the next week, she tried to return to her normal routine. She worked the same shifts, served the same dishes, and greeted the same customers. But the piano, sitting silently in the corner, seemed to be calling her. Every time she passed it, her heart would race, and a strange feeling of longing would settle in her chest. She tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The music had a hold on her now, and it wasn't going to let go. One afternoon, as Olivia arrived for her shift, she saw that the restaurant was unusually quiet. The evening rush hadn't started yet, and most of the staff was either on break or finishing their tasks. She could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a dish being washed in the kitchen. It was peaceful, and for a moment, Olivia felt a sense of calm that she hadn't experienced in a while. As she moved through the dining area, she saw the man, the millionaire, sitting at his usual table. He was alone, as always, but this time there was something different about him. His posture was more relaxed than usual, his eyes less sharp and more focused on the menu in front of him. He didn't seem to notice Olivia right away, and she used the opportunity to clear a few tables nearby. But as she worked, she found herself glancing over at him more than once. His presence was always commanding, but today it seemed softer somehow. It wasn't long before he noticed her. He looked up and caught her eye, his expression softening into the familiar kind smile she had seen so many times before. There was no hint of pretense in his demeanor, just genuine interest. "How are you today?" he asked, his voice calm and warm. Olivia smiled, a little surprised by the question. "I'm good, thank you," she replied. "Just a quiet day, I guess." He nodded thoughtfully. "I like when it's quiet. It gives you time to think, time to reflect." His words hit her in a way she wasn't prepared for. She wasn't sure why, but something about them made her feel understood, as though he saw more of her than she had allowed others to see. There was a brief silence between them, and then he asked, "Have you thought more about playing?" The question took her off guard. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again. She had hoped he would forget, or at least stop mentioning it. But here he was asking once more. I don't know," she said hesitantly, trying to find the right words. "I guess I've been thinking about it, but it feels strange. I don't know if I'm ready." He gave a small, understanding nod. "It's okay to feel unsure, but you have a gift, and sometimes it takes a little courage to share that with others." His words lingered in her mind long after she walked away. She hadn't expected him to be so encouraging, so understanding of her hesitation. It made her wonder about him, why he cared about her playing the piano, why he cared about her at all. Over the next few days, Olivia couldn't shake the conversation. She found herself thinking about the piano more and more. It was like a pull, an invisible thread drawing her closer to it, to the possibility of something more. She couldn't deny that she wanted to play, that she longed to let the music fill the air again, but she was still scared. The thought of playing in front of someone else made her stomach twist. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? But the millionaire's words echoed in her mind. "You have a gift." It felt like a challenge, and Olivia wasn't sure if she was ready to rise to it. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't ignore the piano any longer. One evening, as the restaurant was beginning to empty out, Olivia found herself standing in front of the piano again. The last of the guests had left, and the staff was wrapping up their tasks. The silence in the room was thick, but for some reason it felt peaceful instead of intimidating. Olivia had made up her mind. She wasn't going to back away this time. She sat down at the bench, feeling the cool surface of the keys beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, trying to calm the nervous energy that buzzed in her chest. The weight of the moment hung in the air, and for a brief second she considered getting up and walking away. But then she remembered the quiet encouragement in the millionaire's voice. She remembered the music she had played before, the way it had made her feel. With a quiet resolve, she pressed her fingers down on the keys, letting the music spill out. The notes were soft at first, hesitant, but as the melody began to take shape, her confidence grew. She let the music guide her, moving from one note to the next, allowing herself to get lost in the rhythm. There was no audience, no expectations, just the music and the peace that came with it. As the song ended, Olivia sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. She didn't know why, but she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. It wasn't about playing perfectly or impressing anyone. It was about letting herself be vulnerable, about allowing herself to take a step forward despite her fear. Just as she was about to stand up, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, startled, to find the millionaire standing there, watching her with a look of quiet approval. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "I knew you had it in you." Olivia felt her heart race, but she couldn't help but smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, taking a step closer. "You have a gift, Olivia. Don't hide it. Don't be afraid to share it with the world." Her heart swelled with a mix of emotions. She didn't know what to say, but in that moment she knew something had changed. The fear that had held her back for so long began to loosen its grip. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. The millionaire smiled one last time before he turned to leave, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. As she sat there staring at the empty room, she realized that this was just the beginning. The music had always been there, waiting for her, and now she was ready to embrace it. Olivia's life had changed in ways she never expected. The restaurant was the same, the customers were the same, and yet, everything felt different. Every time she walked past the piano, she felt the pull. It was no longer just an instrument sitting in the corner. It was a reminder of something she had once hidden from herself. It was the key to a door she hadn't even realized was there until now. And despite her fears, she couldn't deny that the more she played, the more it felt like she was discovering a new part of herself. For a while, she kept to herself, playing only when the restaurant was quiet and empty, making sure no one would hear her. But even then, she could feel the weight of her own self-doubt pressing down on her. What if people didn't like it? What if they thought she wasn't good enough? The doubts crept in as they always did. But she was starting to realize that the music wasn't about anyone else. It was for her. It was for the woman who had spent so many years hiding behind the comfort of her job, afraid to let herself dream bigger. One evening, the restaurant was especially quiet. Olivia was alone in the dining area, checking on a few things before the next rush of customers arrived. The sound of the piano echoed softly in the background, almost as though it were calling to her. She stood there for a moment, her fingers twitching at her sides, itching to play again. For a long time she had kept her distance from it, telling herself that it wasn't the right time or that she wasn't ready. But she was done making excuses. The moment had come. She moved toward the piano, her heart beating a little faster with each step. As she sat down, she felt the familiar coolness of the keys beneath her fingers, and for a moment everything felt right. The doubts, the fears, they all melted away. She didn't care who was watching or who might hear. The music wasn't about them. It was about her, about reclaiming a part of herself she had almost forgotten. She pressed down on the first key, and the sound filled the room. It was soft, tentative, but it was enough to get her started. She played slowly at first, feeling her way through the melody. But as the song grew, so did her confidence. Her fingers moved more fluidly, the music coming from her as naturally as breathing. The more she played, the more the world around her seemed to fade away. It was just her and the music, and for the first time in a long while, Olivia felt completely at peace. Time passed, but she didn't notice. When the song ended, she sat there for a while, letting the quiet settle around her. She had done it. She had played in front of no one but herself. But it had been enough. She had let go of the fear, and in doing so, she had found something she had been searching for all along. She stood up from the bench and looked around the restaurant. It was still empty, still quiet, but she felt different now. The weight on her shoulders had lifted, and for the first time in ages she felt lighter. Just as she was about to leave the piano, the sound of footsteps reached her ears. She turned to see the millionaire walking toward her, a smile on his face. He had been a regular at the restaurant for weeks now, and though they didn't speak often, Olivia had come to recognize him as someone who saw more than most. "You played," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I could hear it from the dining room." Olivia felt a flush of heat spread across her cheeks. I didn't think anyone would hear." He smiled kindly. "I've been hearing you play for a while now. You have a beautiful gift, and it's been a pleasure to watch you find the courage to share it." Olivia was taken aback. She hadn't realized he'd been listening, hadn't known that he'd been paying attention all this time. The words he spoke were simple, but they held so much weight. He had been encouraging her from the very beginning, even when she hadn't been sure of herself. And now hearing him say that, hearing the sincerity in his voice, it made something inside her click. Maybe she was ready to share her gift with others. Maybe she was ready to stop hiding. "I've been trying," she said, her voice soft. "But it's harder than I thought." He took a step closer, his expression thoughtful. "It's always hard at first. But the more you share your gift, the easier it becomes. Don't be afraid to let others see what you can do." Her heart swelled with emotion. She didn't know what to say, but his words filled her with a sense of possibility she hadn't known before. It was like a door had been opened, and she could see a future that was brighter, more colorful, more full of promise than she had ever imagined. "I don't know if I'm ready for that yet," she said honestly, "but I'm starting to think maybe I could be." The millionaire nodded as if he understood exactly where she was coming from. "I think you're closer than you realize." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable, until he finally spoke again. "I think you should play for someone else. Not just for yourself." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not sure I could." "You don't have to do it right away," he said gently. "But you have something special, and I think the world deserves to hear it." Olivia looked at him, unsure of what to say. She had spent so much time hiding from her own talent, so much time convinced that she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't ready. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding, to stop second-guessing herself. The music had been a part of her for so long, and now it was time to let it be a part of the world. Over the next few weeks, Olivia continued to play, but this time, there was a new sense of purpose behind her music. She played not just for herself, but for the people who might hear her. For the ones who might be moved by her music the way she had once been moved. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but she kept pushing through. She had a gift, and it was time to share it. And then, one night, as the restaurant began to fill with guests, Olivia found herself standing in front of the piano once again. The room was quiet except for the soft murmur of conversation, and the light from the chandelier cast a warm glow across the space. The air felt thick with anticipation, but Olivia didn't feel nervous. She felt calm, focused. She was ready. With a deep breath, she sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys once more. She glanced around the room, her heart beating a little faster, but she didn't hesitate. The music began, and as it filled the space, Olivia knew deep down that this was just the beginning. This was the first of many steps toward something bigger, something brighter. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly living. The applause that followed was soft but sincere. And for the first time in a long while, Olivia smiled. It was a quiet beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless, and she couldn't wait to see where the music would take her. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change for Olivia. What had started as a quiet, solitary experience of rediscovery had become something far bigger. The piano, which had once sat untouched in the corner of the restaurant, was now a central part of her life. Each day as she walked into the restaurant, she felt the familiar pull toward the instrument. It was no longer just a place to escape. It had become a place where she found her true self. It wasn't just the music that had changed Olivia. It was everything. She had begun to see the world around her with a new sense of wonder. The restaurant, which had once felt like a safe haven but also a cage, had become a place where she could express herself in ways she hadn't thought possible. The music had opened her eyes to the beauty in the everyday, to the small moments that were often overlooked. The way the sunlight streamed through the windows in the morning, the laughter of a child sitting with her parents, the soft clinking of dishes, Everything seemed more vibrant now. But there were still challenges. Olivia's confidence had grown in ways she never expected, but it wasn't without its setbacks. The first few times she had played in front of customers, her hands had trembled. Her heart had raced with the kind of nervous excitement that had almost made her stop altogether. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the old voice inside her would whisper that she wasn't good enough, that she was only fooling herself. But with each passing day, Olivia had learned to silence that voice. She had learned that doubt was a part of the process, not the end of it. It was okay to feel uncertain, to feel like she wasn't perfect. What mattered was that she kept going. And with that determination, she began to build something bigger than just her music. She began to build a sense of trust in herself, a trust that told her to keep playing even when the world outside felt uncertain. One evening, as Olivia sat at the piano, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The room was quieter than usual, with only a few guests in the restaurant. The soft light of the chandelier glimmered against the polished wood of the piano, and for a moment Olivia allowed herself to sink into the music. She played not for an audience, not for recognition, but for herself. The melody swirled in the air, flowing effortlessly from her fingertips, each note a reflection of everything she had been through. It wasn't just about playing, it was about letting go. As the last note faded, Olivia sat there, her hands resting lightly on the keys. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to rush. There was no pressure to do anything more. She had reached a place where the music was enough, where the simple act of playing was enough. It was a feeling she hadn't known in years, the feeling that she was exactly where she needed to be. She was so absorbed in the moment that she didn't notice the man, the millionaire, entering the restaurant. He walked in quietly, as he often did, and took a seat at his usual table. Olivia noticed him out of the corner of her eye, but she didn't stop playing. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so free, so sure of what she was doing. As the last few notes of the song echoed through the room, Olivia finally stopped playing. She turned to see the millionaire watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. He gave her a small nod as though he had been listening all along. "That was beautiful," he said softly, his voice carrying across the room. Olivia smiled, a little embarrassed but also proud. "Thank you," she replied. "It's something new I've been working on." He nodded, his gaze never leaving her. "You've come a long way. I can see the difference in your playing." Olivia's heart swelled. It had taken time to get to this point. There had been so many moments when she wanted to give up, when the fear of failure had almost stopped her from continuing. But hearing his words, hearing someone else acknowledge the progress she had made, it made all the struggle feel worthwhile. "I've been thinking about what you said," Olivia said quietly, her fingers brushing against the piano keys. "About sharing my gift with others. I think I'm ready." The millionaire smiled, a look of understanding in his eyes. "I knew you were. You just needed to believe in yourself first." Olivia took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over her. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer afraid to walk the path. She had spent so many years hiding from her own talent, from the fear of rejection and failure, but now she was ready to step into the light. She had discovered that music wasn't just a way to express herself. It was a way to connect with others, to make a difference in their lives. Over the next few weeks, Olivia played more frequently for the customers at the restaurant. At first, it was just small moments here and there. A song played while the guests ate, a quiet tune in the background as they finished their meals. But as time went on, Olivia felt more confident. She began to see the joy her music brought to the people around her. She would catch glimpses of customers smiling, tapping their feet to the rhythm, or even whispering to each other about how beautiful the music was. It made her feel as though she was a part of something bigger, that her music was making the space come alive. It wasn't long before people began to request songs. Olivia was surprised at first, unsure if she was ready to take on the challenge. But as she listened to their requests and thought about the music she knew, she realized that she was more than capable. She had spent so many years keeping herself hidden, but now she had a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for others, for the people who needed the comfort of a good song, for the ones who found solace in the melodies. The night she played her first full set was a night Olivia would never forget. The restaurant was packed with guests, and for the first time she wasn't nervous. She was calm, focused. As she began to play, she could feel the energy in the room shift. The atmosphere changed, becoming lighter, more joyful. The guests were no longer just eating. They were listening. They were present. And for the first time, Olivia realized that her music had the power to create something beautiful, something that connected people. When she finished the set, the applause was thunderous. Olivia felt a rush of emotions, pride, joy, relief. But most of all, she felt grateful. Grateful for the chance to share her music. Grateful for the support of the people who had believed in her. And grateful for the courage she had found within herself. It wasn't just about the applause, it was about the journey, about the steps she had taken to get here. And in that moment, Olivia knew that this was just the beginning. The music had always been a part of her, but now she was ready to make it a bigger part of her life. Whatever the future held, she was ready to face it, and no matter what, she would keep playing.